Welcome, my friends. This is the wrong intro. D. Vercordigalair, that's it. Welcome to the Irish Nation Lives. Did you miss me? Because I didn't miss you. Now, for those of you who think that this is some kind of a face reveal video, well then obviously you haven't followed me across to Maniacal Incorporated or to Twitch, where I've been streaming and putting up videos on Irish history in video games for the last couple of years, instead of doing anything with this channel. I have a couple of videos on the H-blocks. I reconstructed the H-blocks in Prison Architect using blueprints and documentary footage, and I discussed how the prison was constructed, how it operated, and its closure, and some of the many people who inhabited it for a period of time. I have some videos on medieval Irish history in Crusader Kings 3, so discussing how medieval Irish history is represented, what they've done accurately, what they've done inaccurately. And I have some videos on the medieval Irish marriage laws under Brehon law and discussing how these are represented in the game. And most recently, I've done some videos on Ireland in the cyberpunk universe, so how Ireland is represented and the various references to the IRA in the cyberpunk tabletop role-playing game and in Dune. So Frank Herbert, the author of Dune, was Irish-American. His mother was McCarthy, and the family believed that they were descendants of the Clancarthys of Blarney Castle, so I discussed the family's Irish ties, their Irish-American heritage, and how Ireland is represented in some of Frank Herbert's works, including Dune. So I'm going to put a link to that up in the corner. I know video games isn't exactly going to be everybody's cup of tea, and Irish history in video games isn't going to be something of interest to everyone. I used to put up some references to the videos here on the community section, and I've put a few of them in the end screen of some of the videos, but I know not everyone here is going to be interested in them. But if it sounds like something that you might be interested in, and if you want to hear more random Irish history conversations and topics, head on over. I'll put a link up in the top corner to the Dune video, the most recent one I did on Frank Herbert. So give that a look, and head on over to Twitch if you have any questions about Irish history. I'm always glad to talk Irish history on Twitch while playing video games terribly. Now, the next question is, what the hell happened to the Irish Nation Lives? Why haven't there been any videos on this channel for, I think, close to 3 years at this stage? I was planning on making a dedicated video dealing with this topic, and I was thinking about leaving this to the end of this video and dealing with it in depth, but you know what, there isn't really a lot to talk about. Quite simply, I got to a stage where I wasn't able to justify the time, the effort, or the cost of making these videos. During COVID, I made a very stupid mistake. It is one that I regret deeply. I started an online masters. I did an online masters during COVID. It destroyed every ounce of free time that I had, and certain concessions had to be made and certain sacrifices had to be made. Maniacal Incorporated went on a bit of a hiatus. I wasn't streaming on Twitch. There was a lot of other things I wasn't doing, and it was impossible to keep up with getting the Irish Nation Lives videos out. When I was coming towards the end of the Masters, I tried kind of wrapping it up. There was the poisonous friendship of Collins and Brua. There was the video on the Customs House. The next video would have been the truce, which would have been a nice little kind of a bow tie to the War of Independence itself. I could have left it for a couple of years then or whatever to come back and do the Civil War. I really wanted to get that video on the truce out, but by that stage a lot of the momentum had gone and never got around to it. And tomorrow, as I'm making this video now, is the anniversary of the truce. So it would have been nice to have had that video. And the fact that the truce is coming up tomorrow is one of the reasons why I'm making this one. Now, considering all the time and effort and blood, sweat and tears that I poured into it, if you're interested in my master's thesis, I will post a link to that below in the description as well. Identifying key players in the 1916 Rising, using general centrality measures and K-shell decomposition. The paper itself is nonsense. It's not really worth reading. Maybe the conclusions. And there are, however, some pretty pictures in there of the social networks that I was able to construct using intelligence files compiled by the DMP in 1915 and 1916. I had a version of this project online a couple of years ago where I just wanted to see, is it possible to construct a social network from this data? So this project was a much more in-depth analysis of the dataset and of the network. Now, the Masters wasn't the only reason why the Irish Nation Lives kind of went by the wayside. We were, of course, in the middle of COVID. I had big plans to go to ambush sites, to travel around to different locations and to kind of do a bit of filming on site, or at least get some footage on site of various different locations during the War of Independence and the Civil War. That all went by the wayside with COVID. And there were a couple of other issues as well, which meant that time was in very short supply for a period of time, and it became very difficult, like I said, to justify the time and effort that these videos took. There was a good chunk of research involved. There was a good chunk of even just writing out the script. It took me a good chunk of time. And then you had the editing. And I know towards the end, one of the videos, I was under a lot of stress. I was under a lot of pressure. And one of the videos, I made a good chunk of mistakes in the captioning at the bottom. And oh boys, oh did that come across in the comment section. There was a lot of people very angry at that. And it got me down a bit. So I was in a fairly stressful scenario. And it was kind of like, there was a couple of things that were making me kind of go, can I keep this going? Should I keep this going? I'll take a break for a short while. And that short while turned into indefinitely, unfortunately. So that now brings us to our next question, which is, why now? Why a video after all this length of time? I had been thinking of making a video to just kind of address why there has been nothing on the channel for the last couple of years. I never planned for it kind of to end like this. I'd like to have gotten that bow on the channel with the video on the truce, so I thought it'd be only fair to kind of come back and say what was happening. Every once in a while somebody does wander across to Maniac Link and asks over there what exactly is going on, and people ask here in the comments from time to time as well. So that was one reason. I've been thinking with the last while of actually making a video just to address what happened with the Irish Nation Lives. Another reason is because with the last while, that's been going on now for a while, the Great War channel has put up a few videos on the War of Independence, and most recently they put up one called Why Britain Lost the Irish War of Independence, 4K documentary. And I thought, do you know what, I might react to that video, and I was actually planning on reacting to it and putting it up on the Maniac Link channel. And then, with the last couple of weeks, I realised that this channel was barreling towards 7,500 subscribers, which is a pretty solid number. So congratulations to all of you, and thank you very much to everybody who has supported this channel. It has grown from strength to strength to strength since I stopped making videos. I was the problem. I was what was holding this channel back. I think when I made the last constant update towards the end of 2020, we had about 1,800 subs. And as I was making like the very last videos, I think it had jumped to maybe 2,800 or something like that as a result of the Blue Shirt video. Boys, oh boys, that video did numbers. And yeah, it's just gone from strength to strength to strength since I stopped making videos. So I thought, as we hit 7,500, do you know what? I will show my face. I'll literally and figuratively, I'll appear and react to Why Britain Lost the Irish War of Independence, 4K documentary, by the Great War. Let's see what I agree with, what I disagree with, and let's just react to this video. Now, the reason that I'm doing this is because the Great War team interviewed me back in, was it 2020? Leo Varadkar had just cancelled St. Patrick's Day. And it was a couple of days later, it was the 23rd of March, so it must have been 2020, when Flo interviewed me. Now, Jesse, I actually spoke with Jesse. About 2 weeks before that, they were supposed to interview me, and we couldn't get there was something wrong with the recording footage or the recording sound on their side, so we cancelled it, and then 2 weeks later, the entire world was shutting down. So Jesse actually couldn't get the train to the studio to be on the call, because, like I said, the whole world was shutting down at that stage. I had mentioned that the Irish Nation Lives was greatly inspired by the format of the Great War, which was the kind of the old format that they had, which was the week by week by week, step by step by step analysis of the events. I kind of found that in Ireland we have a tendency to project backwards. So as we're dealing with the events of the War of Independence, we're constantly thinking about the upcoming civil war, and we're constantly seeing in the actions of those in the War of Independence the eventual split and division. And we're kind of pulling history backwards, if that makes sense. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to step through the events of the War of Independence. And I thought this was a great format for doing that. I wanted to step through the events and kind of try not to focus too much on what was coming down the line, to show what was in the minds of the people in the moment. Because we've kind of constructed these grand narratives, which quite often require the individuals to have knowledge of events that are 10, 15, 20 years in the future. And I thought this was a fantastic format, and I'd said that, and I'd mentioned that it was greatly inspired by the Great War, so they got in touch with me to do an interview. Now, Flo, I was sent down the questions a couple of weeks in advance, and I just typed up some notes, and the conversation started, and one of the questions, I will never forget it. I've totally forgotten the question, but I remember the general context. Flo asked about the loss of control, the British loss of control, and I had my answer prepared. So I talked about the loss of control of the political situation, how Sinn Féin managed to dominate the 1918 general election, and then instead of taking their seats in Westminster, established Dáil Éireann, and then how they won the local elections, and how basically they managed to seize political or moral authority from the British. They negated recruitment to the RIC. They established, or kind of established, the IRA police and Dáil courts. So now they've taken control of, or at least they're chipping away at British control of the judicial system and the legal system. Now, I could tell that Flo wasn't entirely happy with the answer, and I think he basically reiterated the question, and I reiterated a lot of the same points, and I could tell he was actually quite angry with the answer, and moved on, and we went on to the next question. It wasn't until afterwards that I realized that he was talking about the loss of territorial control by the British. A question that was effectively so alien to me as somebody who would like to consider themselves knowledgeable on the War of Independence that I didn't even understand that that's the question that was being asked. 100%. We have scenarios in which the IRA destroys RIC barracks, and the RIC withdraw from rural areas and they go into the towns. The IRA doesn't then take over those barracks. They've destroyed them, in general. Quite often, the RIC will come back and they will seize a house from a known Sinn Féin sympathiser and re-establish that, or try to re-establish it, as the RIC barracks. More often than not, as the War of Independence goes on, armoured convoys and patrols will leave the towns and cities and go into the rural areas where the RIC have been driven out of. So there is a loss of a kind of a permanent local position, but there isn't really loss of territorial control. You don't have Liam Lynch and Richard Mulcahy and others in IRA General Headquarters leaning over a table with a big map of Ireland on it, pushing pieces around and drawing lines and looking at what territories are controlled and what territories aren't controlled. The IRA never really establishes territorial control. It doesn't possess buildings. The one and only time that it does so is when it seizes the customs house, and that's it seized it to set fire to it. It wasn't aiming to use it as an actual headquarters or anything like that. They do have, you couldn't really call them no-go areas, rural, hilly, mountainous areas that they are able to traverse, which the British don't really enter. But what I suppose fascinated me simply was the fact that you have here an international team of historians. They are looking at a wide variety of events throughout the world in this time period, and when they look at Ireland, they're bringing a certain mindset to it, which they're applying to all of the other wars. It shows the lack of a common language, I suppose, between quite often those of us in Ireland, knowledgeable on the War of Independence, and those outside. And it made me really interested in when somebody from outside of Ireland decides to look at the War of Independence. how did they do so? What sources did they use? What questions do they ask? Because again, like I said, we have that narrative. We have this kind of, if you're watching a documentary, if you're watching a movie on the War of Independence or the Civil War or anything like that, there are certain beats that you're expecting. There are certain things that you're expecting to be said. And quite often I've watched videos on aspects of the War of Independence and the Civil War made by people who are maybe looking at it for the first time, and I've kind of thought that's an interesting and odd way of looking at a specific event. Quite often they will place a great deal of importance in events that we wouldn't really think are all that important, and then quite often the other way around. They would brush off as unimportant something that in Ireland and in kind of traditional Irish studies is treated with great importance. Now, the question being asked by this video, why Britain lost the War of Independence? Is it a question? No, they're telling us why Britain lost the War of Independence. We're going to pretend it's a question. I feel that I answered that question to flow, not realizing that wasn't the question that was being asked. I described how basically counter-state apparatus and institutions were established by the shadow government, by Dáil Éireann, the IRA, the Dáil courts, control of the local government, the IRA police, and so on and so on. And that this basically created a scenario in which Britain could not ever again enforce total control. You could not go back to the pre-1919 days ever again, where all Irish politicians are taking their seats in Westminster, where the RIC is restored as the legal police force, where Sinn Féin is no longer on the local councils. Basically, conditions are created in which Britain have lost control of Ireland, and so eventually they have to come to some type of a compromise. And that this is basically how the War of Independence is won. Right then, I have shrunk myself down to the bottom corner and put on my trusty headset. And here we have the video. I have it on the screen here beside me, but I'm also looking at the screen, which has the camera over it. Why Britain lost the War of Independence, the Irish War of Independence. It's a title that I imagine is a bit clickbaity to make some people very angry the way they click on the video and leave some mean comments to act as engagement and spurn on the algorithm which controls all our lives. Blessed be the algorithm, which for some reason every once in a while decides that everyone wants to hear about the blue shirts. It just, blue shirts for everyone. Thank you, algorithm, thank you. So I believe, I would imagine there's a bit of clickbaitiness in the title. It does bring up an interesting question. Did Britain lose the War of Independence? The War of Independence was an insurgency, a low to mid-level insurgency. Now, I did a podcast episode on waging insurgent warfare, which might be interesting to check out if you've a bit more interest in that side of things. And it was a look at a book called Waging Insurgent Warfare by Seth G. Jones from the RAND Corporation, and I wanted to see if it could be applied to the War of Independence, and if some of the reasonings for why insurgencies break out, if the same statistical analysis could be applied back to the War of Independence. We tend to have a very emotive understanding in Ireland of why people went and fought and died for Ireland. We tend to have a very kind of emotive understanding of their motivations. But waging insurgent warfare sets out a kind of a statistical analysis of the motivations of insurgents. So what we're dealing with here is a low-level insurgency. The counter-insurgent forces, look at them there. There's one of them. There's the Devils with their big convoy truck and their helmets. So the counter-insurgent forces, the government forces, the British in this case, their goal is to destroy the insurgency. It is not to get the insurgency to negotiate. It's not to get the insurgency to compromise. The British Army were not fighting so that Michael Collins would walk into Downing Street and shake hands with the British Prime Minister and negotiate with him. That's not what they were fighting for. They were fighting to destroy the insurgency. The insurgency's goals, quite often they're very lofty. Overthrow the government, declare a republic, etc., etc. Effectively, the insurgency's goal is simply to exist. For as long as the insurgency continues, the counterinsurgents are losing. Did anyone win the War of Independence? The British most certainly failed to achieve their objective. They failed horrendously. Dáil Éireann and the IRA technically did not achieve their main objective, which was a 32-county republic or 26-county externally associated state. But they failed upwards. The British just failed badly. That's the argument that can be made. I don't think it's fair to say either of the two sides won. However, within 20 years, the Irish had achieved a substantial amount of their objectives. So it's an interesting question to ask. The British will attempt to reframe the War of Independence as a total victory for them. They were simply trying to keep it going until they could create Northern Ireland, and once Northern Ireland was safe, then those paddies in the south could do whatever they wanted. That is most certainly not what the British war goal was in the War of Independence. And it could be argued, like I said, their goal was as late as in the days approaching the truce, basically up until the burning of the Customs House. Their goal was the annihilation of Sinn Féin, and in that they failed. Now, what I'm going to argue is that some of the stuff that I brought up to Flo about how the IRA managed to take control of various institutions, or how the Sinn Féin and Dáil Éireann and local government, the judicial system, how the Irish basically knocked control of the state apparatus and established their own counter-state apparatus, and how this put the British in a position where they just simply could not restore control and had to abandon their goals of trying to get the Irish back into Westminster, trying to get the Irish to accept the Southern Ireland Parliament, trying to get the Sinn Féin out of local government, trying to re-establish the RIC and stuff like this. So that is what I am expecting. Right, after all that big long lengthy rant, let's sit down, let's watch this. I'm not going to watch the whole video in its totality. I am going to watch the whole video in its totality, but I'm not going to show the entire video here. If you want to watch the video, go and check it out on the Great War channel. I'm going to leave it mini-screened as well. If you want to watch it in better quality, go and watch it on their channel. Go and give them the views. I don't like people who just watch videos to react to them, and they'll just watch the video and then every once in a while just stop it and go, wow, I never knew that. Isn't that amazing? That's wow. And then back to the video. They're basically just trying to take the click from the content creators. These guys have put a tremendous amount of work into their videos, so do go and watch them. But I'm just gonna stop in a number of different areas and see what's of interest and react to the Great War's theory as to why the British lost the Irish War of Independence.
But many in Ireland were unhappy with. In January 1919, Great Britain had just emerged victorious from the First World War and ruled over an even larger empire than before. But many in Ireland were unhappy with British rule, and over the next 2 years, Irish Republicans won their independence. So how did the mighty British Empire lose the Anglo-Irish War? The so-called Irish question had marked UK politics since Ireland became part of the UK in 1800, and was still a difficult topic in 1914. That year, the British Parliament passed a Home Rule Act, giving Ireland more autonomy within the UK, but the government delayed implementing it when the Great War broke out.
I will just say very quickly, there is another podcast episode somewhere on the Home Rule Parliament and what powers would have been extended under a Home Rule Parliament, and I don't so much as say it in the video, but there is very much the insinuation that it wouldn't have taken very much time for people within Sinn Féin or the Irish Republican Brotherhood or counter-state organisations to show how utterly ineffective, ineffectual and powerless the Home Rule Parliament was. It also would not have answered the majority of the questions which actually motivated a lot of the War of Independence. Again, those reasons are probably mentioned in the Waging Insurgent Warfare episode. I look at Peter Hart's The IRA at War. Hart, a lot of people don't like him, but he did a statistical analysis of the causes of violence throughout the country. A lot of it is economic, and the Home Rule Parliament would not have been able to solve those problems. So basically, if Home Rule had been implemented, we would probably have seen a war of independence, or maybe even just straight to a civil war of a different kind. But that's a what-if scenario that we don't really get to think too much about.
Many Irishmen, though, felt that British rule was foreign and unjust and wanted a fully independent republic. Sinn Féin did not send its representatives to sit in the London Parliament. Instead, leader Eamon de Valera announced an Irish-only parliament called the Dáil. Preparing for conflict, Sinn Féin worked. So in March 1920, the British created the RIC Special Reserve, better known as the Black and Tans, since they used some army khaki in their dark uniforms. Most were English or Irish Protestants who...
So, the Special Reserve, not true, not real, does not exist. I know some people have spoken about this on Wikipedia, that Wikipedia is pretty much the first place that this popped up. I can't remember, was it the Irish History subreddit or the Irish Story, but this has popped up in a couple of places. The Black and Tans are the RIC. The Black and Tans is a nickname that is given to members of the RIC. They're on RIC pensions, RIC contracts, RIC rank. They are members of the RIC. They're recruited in England, predominantly in England, from ex-World War I, demobilised World War I veterans, but they are full-blown members of the RIC. There is no distinction whatsoever. They have RIC numbers. There is no distinction between them and other serving members of the RIC. If they had been able to win the War of Independence, they would have continued their contracts into the 2040s, the 1940s. They were on 20-year contracts. 20 years is what they would have needed to serve to get, I think it's about 24 to 26 years to get their full pension entitlements. So the idea of the Special Reserve, it's still floating around there. The idea that the Black and Tans were completely separate under their own separate command structure and stuff like that. The auxiliaries were. The RIC were not.
Who fought in the Great War, although 20% were Catholic. But contrary to popular belief, very few were criminals before joining. Sinn Féin set up a parallel state in the countryside, including Republican courts, police patrols, and taxes. They also brought the British court system to a virtual halt, as witnesses, juries, and even judges refused to participate. The Auxies and Black and Tans became more known for violence against civilians than for fighting the IRA. They often couldn't find the IRA after an ambush, and many shopkeepers refused to sell to police. So under constant threat of attack, the Auxies and Black and Tans...
This is, of course, the famous Battle of Tralee. So that's an auxiliary. That's an auxiliary. That's an auxiliary. So this is a staged photograph. I, of course, have a video on the actual siege of Tralee and the Battle of Tralee. And that's an auxiliary. That guy on the ground dead is an auxiliary. Well, he's not dead. He's just lying on the ground. So this is a staged photograph. I think it's on the cover of Havoc, which is being quoted here a lot. So sometimes it gets posted as a real picture, as in there's an IRA man being interrogated by two brave men from Blighty. But sometimes then people will point out that it's a fake photo. So an early piece of propaganda.
Turned to violent reprisals as punishment. One strength of the IRA was intelligence. Sinn Féin's secretive Minister for Home Affairs and Director of Intelligence, Michael Collins, had become a legendary figure. He built a network of informers in the British administration and police. The British relied on paid informants, a problematic system, but one that did bring some results. Collins decided a dramatic action was needed. The Dáil approved his plan for an IRA group known as the Squad to kill 12 members of British intelligence known as the Cairo Gang in their own homes.
Oh.
On the morning...
So, again, there's a video up there somewhere on the channel about Bloody Sunday, and I have that very image in the video, or in the thumbnail, to get people. Well, it's the most recognizable one. It does not supposedly show the Cairo gang. That is FCOI of the auxiliaries. None of them, I think, of the people in that photo, only one of them died during the War of Independence, and I think it was in a car crash or something like that. So they were not, that was, the Cairo gang doesn't exist. We're not too sure where the term Cairo gang comes from. It doesn't seem to have been used before the 1950s. I'm unsure if it's in My Fight for Irish Freedom. I don't know. There seems to have been this misconception that a British officer was killed, and his brother came home from Cairo, possibly with some soldiers or with some other officers, and took part in a number of raids against suspected Sinn Féin sympathisers. So it's possible that from there, this kind of legend of the Cairo gang evolved. There's also this idea that British intelligence officers tended to frequent I think it was the Cairo bar, and became associated with it. These are some of the rumours that have evolved, but there was no such thing as the Cairo gang. The people in that image, a couple of years ago, an IRA intelligence dossier was found.
This is really crucial because IRA needed to know what their targets looked like. So all of these people are being identified as being real significant dangers to IRA operations.
What Collins would get people to do is basically buy the newspaper, bring it back to the office and sit down, and they would go through the society section, because all these British officers in Ireland, they were very keen on getting themselves in the papers for boating events, going out on picnics, going out on horse riding events, and they made sure that they were there. So like the IRA was just cutting out pictures, putting them into basically kind of a scrapbook, and with the names, and they were compiling dossier on these people from just publicly available information. But there was a picture that's just been shown, and it's identified. All the members are identified as members of FCOI. So another common misconception that gets out there and gets picked up and put in stuff. My video on the Bloody Sunday, people commented, the picture in the thumbnail is not the Cairo gang. So they didn't watch the video. They just started commenting, that's not the Cairo gang. I never said it was, and I deal with the fact at the end of the video that it wasn't the Cairo gang.
Morning of Sunday, November 21st, 1920, the squad killed 14 men, including the first 2 Auxies of the war, in an unplanned clash. It's not clear how many of the dead were actually in the Cairo gang. That afternoon, the British responded, surrounding a crowd watching a Gaelic football match at Croke Park. The police said they wanted to search for IRA agents, but claimed that someone fired at them from the stands, a claim that has never been verified. The Auxies and RI...
The first victim was a child shot out of a tree. The idea, or to even insinuate, and I have seen it around the place, the insinuation that the British forces were fired on first. It seems likely the British started firing before the vehicles had even stopped. The idea to insinuate that it doesn't make sense for the IRA to hide in the crowd and then start shooting from the crowd. So even the insinuation, or to even contemplate the idea, maybe we've no idea, we don't know, maybe the IRA did. No, the British fired first on Bloody Sunday in Croke Park. There is absolutely no evidence whatsoever, and I'm not too sure where that idea is coming from, other than probably the comment section of prior videos that they did. There is absolutely no suggestion whatsoever that the IRA fired first.
IC fired into the crowd, killing 14, including 3 children. The escalation in 1921 left both sides exhausted. The Republicans were militarily weak but politically strong, while the British had the opposite problem. Something had to give. Again. Lloyd George, however, acknowledged the reality of majority Republican support outside of Ulster and offered more talks. In July 1921, a fragile truce began. London wanted an autonomous Ireland to remain part of the empire. Sinn Féin leaders were divided between those willing to compromise and those who felt that anything short of a fully independent republic was a betrayal of the cause. Talks bogged down on two questions: the status of Ulster and whether an Irish government would have to swear an oath to the Crown. Most Republican politicians eventually accepted that Ulster would remain in the UK, and De Valera proposed an oath that recognized an association with the Crown rather than loyalty. But De Valera went back on his own draft oath and refused to participate directly in the talks. On December 5th, Britain gave the divided Irish peace delegation in London an ultimatum: accept the latest deal or face renewed war. The delegates thought that they had the authority to sign without consulting De Valera, and did.
So there's a couple of rather strange things here. External association was De Valera's go-to from the get-go. De Valera knew that a republic, probably from before he had his first meetings with Lloyd George, was unacceptable to the British. The British were not going to accept a republic. External association. The Irish recognizing that they were members. I actually have to check what he just said there again. The Irish recognizing that they are members of an association and recognizing the king as the head of that association for the purposes of the association. It was a bizarre, convoluted scenario. That was the compromise that De Valera knew would bring some of the hardline Republicans on board, at least soften the blow of not getting a republic. De Valera had instructed Collins to basically use the North as leverage to secure external association. So to demand a republic. Okay, you make your demands and you compromise towards the centre. You demand a republic. They're going to say no. You get 26 county home rule. Demand 32 county home rule. They're going to say something else. But you eventually negotiate. And when it came to the Oath of Allegiance, De Valera wanted Collins basically to use Northern Ireland. Fine, we'll give up Northern Ireland and you give us external association. That is what De Valera had instructed him to do, and that's what De Valera kept instructing him to do as he returned, saying the British are not going to accept this. They need a solid oath. Did he say that De Valera wanted an oath of fidelity and then went back on that?
In the UK, and De Valera proposed an oath that recognized an association with the Crown rather than loyalty. But De Valera went back on his own draft oath and refused to participate directly in the talks.
No,
on December 5th.
But so De Valera didn't go back on his own draft oath. Basically, the oath was given to Collins. Collins managed to negotiate an oath with the IRB that was acceptable to the IRB, and that's the oath that ended up being in the treaty. De Valera didn't go back on his draft. De Valera remained obnoxiously loyal to his draft, kind of brought it up a couple of times and then tried to get it ignored during the Anglo-Irish Treaty debates in Dáil Éireann. I was planning on making a video on why Collins was sent in the negotiations and why De Valera didn't go. De Valera viewed himself basically as the star footballer to be called in once the debates broke down, because he knew they would. Then he would waft in from the corridors and save the day. That's what he imagined would happen, and he was caught unawares by... No, I won't say unawares. He should have known that what was coming was coming. De Valera knew in his head the only idea that was acceptable to everybody on the Irish side, and he could not contemplate that deal would not be accepted by the British. And when Collins tried to convince him that this deal would not be accepted, he was utterly blind to that, and was continuing to go along with the idea that you will demand external association, use Northern Ireland as leverage, and if the debates are on the verge of collapsing, I will waft in at the last moment. Collins told him the debates are on the verge of collapsing, and De Valera said, no, just keep pushing them. So it's look, I suppose you're dealing with a very dramatic incident in the space of maybe 2 minutes, so it's not the worst, but there's a couple of kind of strange utterances in this part of the video.
Britain gave the divided Irish peace delegation in London an ultimatum: accept the latest deal or face renewed war. Just before the Dáil ratified the treaty in January 1922, De Valera made an ominous prediction. If the treaty was accepted, the fight for freedom would still go on, and the Irish people, instead of fighting foreign soldiers, would have to fight the Irish soldiers of an Irish government set up by Irishmen. They would have to wade through Irish blood, through the blood of the soldiers of the Irish government, and through perhaps the blood of some of the members of the government in order to get Irish freedom. Ireland had just one.
I'll just say very quickly, it's important to know that De Valera made that statement and was then countered on that statement by Kevin O'Higgins in the next meeting of Dáil Éireann. So it's important to know that De Valera was still attending meetings of Dáil Éireann at the stage. And so were all of those who would be deemed as anti-treaty, well, the overwhelming majority of them, who were deemed as anti-treatyites. So this push to the Civil War, I haven't checked out any of the other videos, but I'm sure the time period between the signing of the treaty up to the 1922 general election and the shelling of the forecourts, when it becomes crystal clear that if De Valera or anybody else was to show up in Dáil Éireann, that they would be executed, is again a fascinating time period that's handled just in a few moments here. We're talking about the Civil War. There's 3 minutes left, and I haven't gotten a concise understanding as to why Britain lost the Irish War of Independence yet. Maybe we'll get it in the last minute or two.
Partial independence, but the Irish Free State was on the brink of civil war. We here at Real Time History love learning about history, and everyone on our team is sat down with family members to learn more about family history. Our producer Flo, though, had a very annoying problem that kept him and a loved one from spending that quality history time together and caused serious financial problems.
DMP
Data
agents?
brokers had illegally collected personal data on said family member.
Right. General Collins, what did you think? There's a little statue. What did you think? You got mentioned a couple of times. Sinn Féin Director of Intelligence. Well done. I didn't know that Sinn Féin had a Directorate of Intelligence, but congrats. Well done on your appointment. So 20 minutes, good video. 21 minutes, good video. If I come to you and ask you the question, why did Britain lose the Irish War of Independence? Would you be able to give me an answer after watching that? I found the statement that towards the end of the middle of 1921, the end of the War of Independence and approaching the truce, that you had this diametrically opposed position between the IRA and the British. The IRA were politically strong and militarily weak, and the British had the opposite problem, and they just had to truce about it. If the British are militarily strong, the British are going to win. We don't have an explanation as to why the British, with their vastly superior military resources, don't simply, you can't see me but I'm clapping my hands, overrun the IRA. Why don't they continue the war for another couple of months and absolutely wipe the IRA off the face of the planet? Lloyd George recognizes the Republican whatever throughout the rest of the country. There are no votes cast in most of the constituencies. Any of the constituencies? Were there votes cast in, like, the Trinity College constituency, where there's a couple of unionists are returned for the Parliament of Southern Ireland? Was there votes cast in those constituencies? I don't know. But in the ones that Sinn Féin wins, there are no votes cast. So, I mean, the British are in a position to say there is no Republican authority. They're being misled by the people, or they're misleading the people, and we're going to wipe them off the face of the planet. Jesse says that the British are militarily strong. They have the military strength. They don't have the political strength. But what does that mean in this time period? They're being criticised by a couple of world governments for the burning of Cork. Like, nobody's threatening to invade. France isn't going to invade. The United States isn't going to invade. If they are, then that's not really made clear. Why? Why is there a truce with this vastly superior military power, which everyone accepts in the middle of 1921? Why is there a truce if they're in a position to wipe the IRA off the face of the planet? I dealt with some of this on my video on the Customs House towards the end of it, talking about how Macready was like, we do not have the troops to meet the demands across the world. We need to rotate troops out of Ireland, and we don't have troops to rotate in. If we are going to deal with the scenario, we need to begin weekly executions. We need to impose martial law, and we need to begin executions. And there are a number of different reasons why Lloyd George disagrees with that. Now, is that political authority? Basically, Macready doesn't want executions, but he's trying to show we have lost control to such a scenario, to such a degree, that if we are to take it back, we need dramatic action that this government probably isn't capable of taking. If we decide to take that action, basically, it's very important to note that there were demands in other parts of the empire. This is maybe what I should have pointed out. Macready begins, as soon as the truce is signed, Macready begins pulling troops out of Ireland and sending them to other parts of the world where they're needed. When Lloyd George begins indicating that the talks are on the verge of breaking down and that the troops might need to, carry out the ultimatum that he threatens, Macready is horrified. Macready says, we don't have the troops. You should have told me this before I started sending troops to other parts of the empire where they're needed. We don't have the troops. So, for a variety of different reasons, Britain's military position at this time period is precarious. The IRA is carrying out tiny little operations on a weekly basis. There is a patrol hit here, there is a patrol hit there, there's a building burnt down. And this is a lesson that counterinsurgent forces are going to learn for decades after this event. The IRA is tiny. It is carrying out small, low-level insurgent attacks. The British need to place massive amounts of troops to deal with those attacks, to patrol, to mitigate against those attacks. And this goes back to what I said at the very start, or at some stage. The counterinsurgents' goals are to destroy the insurgency. The insurgents' goals is simply to remain in the field. Was the Customs House attack a good idea? The British were sure at this point in time that they had the IRA on the run, that they were on the verge of breaking the IRA. Collins says that they were. Others say that they weren't. It's important to remember that Michael Collins was the Sinn Féin Director of Intelligence. Did Collins have a true and in-depth knowledge of what was happening in the field? We don't really know. We know that people were begging Collins for weapons and begging Collins for stuff, and Collins was giving out to them and saying, go and get it yourselves. I think it was Florrie O'Donoghue was quoted there as at one stage as stating that the kind of the lack of an overall cohesive leadership in GHQ. There were some people who operated during the War of Independence and had no contact with General Headquarters. And this meant that these people weren't entirely, totally loyal to a centralized command, and it was very easy for them to then go off and kind of disagree with that command and disavow General Headquarters and Dáil Éireann and split off and basically become anti-treatyite. The GHQ was not in a position to kind of enforce uniformity and to get people to fall in line, shall we say. So was Collins in a position to know what conditions were like on the ground? Things in Dublin were bad, with the arrest of was it 80 people during the Customs House attack. The British thought they were on the verge of defeating the IRA. The Customs House attack was a shock in scale, and the fact that the IRA was then able to keep up operations in its aftermath was another shock to them. We've just arrested 80 of you. There can't be more than 85 of you in the country. And there's still a massive level of attacks. And of course there were attacks outside of the country, outside of Dublin as well. And it's entirely possible that the Customs House, for as questionable of an operation as it was the straw that broke the British back. They basically came to the conclusion, we're not going to be able to deal with this scenario militarily. They may have had a strong military, but they didn't have a military that could actually do a whole heap about the IRA and what was going on. Now, does that mean that the IRA should have continued? Does that mean that the War of Independence should have continued? Does that mean that Collins should have thrown the piece of paper back at Lloyd George when the ultimatum was issued? Does that mean that the IRA could have won a war if the British had redeployed? Those are, again, like I said, what-if scenarios best left to Kaiserreich, an alternate history scenario video game that I play across on Maniacal Incorporated. I have some videos of Michael Collins as president of a united 32-county republic in 1936. You should go and watch them. They're great. They're fantastic. Lots of really interesting Irish history discussions over there. And that's where what-if scenarios are best left to. I've taken off my headset because I'm not listening to anything anymore, but it feels weird talking into this microphone without my headset on. It's just I've gotten so used to it from years and years of the Irish Nation Lives and years and years of streaming. Back when I was making the Irish Nation Lives day one, before I got this arm, what I used to do was here on this table right in front of me, I used to just pile books up, and then there was a little tripod on the doohickey, on the mic, and I placed that on top of the pile of books, and then I used to have to try and, because the keyboard is here beside me, I used to have to try and like claw my hands around the pile of books if I needed to stop the video or go back or do anything like that. My God, those days were... I miss those days. So yeah, overall, as an analysis, as an assessment of the War of Independence, not the worst. Dealt with most of the major beats that you'd expect in a 20-minute long video. There was the questionable, it's not without its faults, there was the questionable pronunciation of the dial, and the spelling of RIC is IRC. I know that's an issue that Jesse's had with a while, with a couple of years, because I remember videos from a few years back where people were leaving comments saying it's not, the RIC is not the IRC. What would we say? The limitations of the research, the age of the research, the depth of the research appears in certain areas, such as maybe this is the Cairo Gang. Michael Collins was sent to kill the Cairo Gang. We think this might be the Cairo Gang. We know for a fact it's not the Cairo Gang. How many members of the Cairo Gang were actually killed on Bloody... None. They didn't exist. How many people in this picture died? None. None of those people were even anywhere near Dublin on the day of Bloody Sunday. So, like, we know the idea of the Cairo Gang, the idea of the Special Reserve, this has all been done away with in the last couple of years. I suppose important for an in-depth Irish history video for something like this. Is it all that important to get that bogged down? Does it matter if people don't know that the Cairo Gang isn't real and didn't exist? I don't know. So it was a good analysis. If you're starting off, if you're brand new to Irish history, I think it's a good place to start. Didn't really upend any of my preconceived notions, didn't really challenge any views that I would have had. There was nothing, repugnant to historical reality, bar maybe the Cairo Gang bit. Just because it's a kind of a meme, or it's a kind of an erroneous interpretation that's grown legs, and we don't know where those legs came from, and we don't know where it's going. But other than that, yeah, it was pretty okay. I don't think it covered the main topic that it was meant to cover, which is why Britain lost the War of Independence. I would have been interested in a definition stating that it was a loss, or an argument. I think there's an interesting argument there, and a very interesting question. Did the British lose the War of Independence? Did the Irish win the War of Independence? I think there's an interesting question there. There's interesting defenses that can be made, and interesting arguments in support and against. So it's an interesting topic that maybe hasn't been done justice in this specific case. So yeah, there you go. This isn't the video I was expecting, or the conclusion that I was expecting to make. Now, very quickly, the future of the channel. What's going to happen in future? The reality is very little. I don't see myself coming back and making any videos in the immediate future. I don't see getting that video on the truce. I would love to do it. I do often think about coming back and finishing it off, but my god, the amount of work, even the amount of editing, and there are some of the more heavily edited videos that I've done over on Maniacal Link, and they just absolutely break any notion of coming back and doing any heavy editing on this side. It's a one-man show. It's me, by my lonesome, doing the research, writing the script, deleting most of the script and rewriting the script at very late hours in the morning, recording the audio, editing the audio, and then putting the video together and getting the footage and editing all that and putting it up, and then realizing that a ton of mistakes have been made and being very sad. That's all. It's just a one-man process, so it takes a lot of time and effort. I don't think it's something that I can or want to get back into anytime soon. However, there are a few videos which I have been planning to make on aspects of Irish history, and I was planning on putting them up on the Maniacal Link channel. They're pure history. They can be shoehorned into, and they've been kind of inspired in some cases by video games, but we'll say I do a video on the marriage laws under Brehon law. I put that up on Maniacal Link because it's aimed at players who are wondering why certain things are in the game, and it's aimed at modders to kind of give them an idea of how things could be changed to be more historically accurate. So they belong over there. But there's a couple of videos, they're inspired by something I've seen in a video game. Maybe they belong here. It's a pure history videos. One, detailing a number of very interesting events from the War of Independence and the Civil War, and beyond. And like I said, I was thinking about putting that over on the other channel. Maybe it doesn't belong there. Maybe that is something that I could do here. That's a longer form video, a scripted video. Once upon a time, I was putting out 2 or 3 of those a month on this channel. I don't tend to put out a lot of them anymore because they take a good chunk of time and effort, and the kind of the payoff, I suppose, isn't huge. So they're few and far between. But I would like to put one of them up on this channel. There's one that I plan to make at some stage. I wouldn't be expecting it any time in the next couple of months. I've often thought about, looking at some local ambush sites. There is one video actually that this video reminded me that I wanted to make on the evolution of convoy stopping. So how convoys were dealt with, or how patrols were dealt with during the War of Independence, because there's a fascinating story to be told there from how the IRA in some of its earliest actions against foot patrols or bicycle patrols, and then how this evolves as armoured cars and convoys come in. So I was thinking of travelling around and maybe making some shorts on ambush sites and things like that, so I might do that at some stage and throw up a few things here. But for now, I'm afraid to say, I wouldn't be expecting too much more excitement or too much more activity over on this channel for a while to come. Obviously, if the channel hits 10,000 views at some stage, I'll have to come back and do something else. I don't know what I'll do. I can't keep reacting to videos, so I'll have to come up with something. It's a pity to leave a channel with 7,500 views or 7,500 subs kind of languishing, but that's where we are, unfortunately, at the moment. If you want to hear me rant about Irish history, medieval Irish history, modern Irish history, upcoming or recent political elections, any aspect of Irish history at all, do wander over to Maniacal Incorporated. Do check out the Twitch channel. I'm always happy to talk about Irish history, clarify things in these videos, recommend a video to me and I'll check it out. There's a Maniacal Link Discord as well. We have a section for history. It's not the most active Discord, but we'll post videos in there. The Dominicans in Ireland are making a lot of really interesting videos at the moment on aspects of medieval Irish history and modern Irish history. So I put those up there and put up just any really interesting stuff that I find. So if you want to keep up with what I'm doing, and some of the other videos and some of the other stuff that I'm doing over on those channels, do wander into Maniacal Incorporated, wander into the Twitch channel, say hello, and listen to me rant incoherently about Irish history. Accorda. Thank you for joining me on The Irish Nation Lives. Slán go fóill.